Good evening and welcome to the Sarasota Colloquium for September 2024. I'm Dr. Lindsay Pollock, Provost at Sarasota University, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to our evening of Demystifying Dyslexia with Dr. Holli Forrest, who's also on faculty here at Sarasota University. I do want to just be sure before we start that everyone is aware that Sarasota University offers a bachelor's completion program in Montessori education, as well as 2 Masters of Arts degrees in Montessori education and Montessori leadership. We recently launched our first dual enrollment program with the Center for Guided Montessori Studies. So students who are pursuing their Montessori credential can also accrue credit toward a degree program at the same time. If you'd like to learn more about our programs at Sarasota University, please go to our website at sarasotauniversity.edu. And it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Holli Forrest this evening. Holli and I had the pleasure of working together at Garden Oaks Montessori School in Houston, Texas, a public Montessori program serving children from 3 years old through 8th grade. And I am so grateful that our paths have crossed again. And I've had a chance to reconnect with Dr. Forrest, and we at Sarasota are just so honored to benefit from her wealth of expertise and knowledge in this field of serving students with unique needs. So Holli, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Welcome to this month's Colloquium. My name is Dr. Holli Forrest, and I'll be your guide during this session. Start with telling you a little bit about myself. So I started my journey in education as a classroom teacher, and I taught for 10 years, all the way from pre-K to middle school. And then I became a dyslexia therapist, and I have been a dyslexia therapist for the last 8 years. And I've been a special education teacher, a district trainer, and I also provide dyslexia therapy in private practice to children and adults. I have a master's degree as a reading specialist and a doctorate degree in special populations leadership. Currently, I'm on the faculty at Sarasota University and Blinn College. Even though dyslexia is not new, many educators find dyslexia a mystery. We will focus on demystifying dyslexia and understanding its characteristics, how to identify it, and what instruction is best for students with dyslexia. Then we will take a look at students with disabilities from a Montessori lens and discuss ways to collaborate with special education. We are going to start by playing a little game called Fact or Myth. If you think the next few slides are a myth, then you will show me a thumbs down reaction through Zoom. And if you think the next few slides are a fact, you'll show me a heart reaction through Zoom. Why don't you start by giving one a try, like a thumbs down or a heart? Dr. Pollock, can you see the reactions? Oh, I'm seeing a thumbs up from Mina. Awesome. Okay, here is our first slide, fact or myth. A key characteristic of dyslexia is writing letters backwards. If you think that's a fact, then give me a heart emoji. If you think it is a myth, then give me a thumbs down.
And you can also enter your reactions in the chat.
Oh, there are a lot of thumbs down. That's right. It is a myth. The key characteristics of dyslexia include difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition, poor spelling, and decoding abilities. A lot of people often think it has to do with writing letters backwards, but research has shown that students write letters backwards whenever they're really concentrating on something, and it's about the same in both the populations of students with dyslexia and without. Okay, let's do another one. Fact or myth, dyslexia does not affect reading comprehension. Show me a reaction with a thumbs down if you think it's a myth, or a heart if you think it's a fact, and feel free to type it in the chat if you can't figure out the reactions in Zoom. Dr. Pollack, what reactions are we seeing?
We're seeing hearts and an agreement that dyslexia does not affect reading comprehension.
That is also a myth. Problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience are secondary consequences of dyslexia. So even though it's primarily with the decoding and spelling, the reduced reading experience causes less vocabulary and background knowledge. Students with dyslexia can have an above average IQ. Fact or myth?
Oh, we're seeing lots of thumbs up and hearts for this.
Oh, awesome. Because that is a fact. A key feature of dyslexia is that difficulties in reading are unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities. Now let's dig deeper into the characteristics of dyslexia. The International Dyslexia Association defines dyslexia by difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition, poor spelling, and decoding abilities. Educators have an obligation to locate and identify students with dyslexia, and any child who shows characteristics of dyslexia is at risk. But the characteristics can vary depending on age. For example, when we look at the youngest students in preschool, a history of speech or language delays or difficulties can be a characteristic of dyslexia. Difficulty with phonological awareness skills, like the number of words in a sentence or syllables in a word, can be a sign of dyslexia. It's important to remember that it's only a characteristic of dyslexia if a student has already received instruction in these skills. So some of the skills in preschool, they may have never received instruction until they go to preschool. So you wouldn't say it's a characteristic on the first day of preschool. It would be after the instruction is received. Another one is trouble learning and naming letters and numbers. In kindergarten, you will continue to see difficulties with identifying letters by name, difficulty identifying, segmenting, and blending syllables in individual sounds and words. That's what we refer to as phonological awareness. And it's important to note that difficulties with dyslexia typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language. So those phonological awareness skills are really important when recognizing dyslexia. And in grades 1 through 2, you start to see some difficulties that are more aligned with that definition of dyslexia, like reading words accurately, poor reading fluency, poor comprehension due to inaccurate or slow reading, poor spelling and written comprehension, and an over-reliance on picture clues or guessing at words. But when you're looking at secondary students, it can sometimes look a little different. Now, remember, when we are younger, we're learning to read. And then when we're in late elementary and secondary, we're reading to learn. So we'll start seeing more difficulties across subject areas. You'll still see the inaccurate and slow reading. Maybe it'll jump to multi-syllabic words. Students avoid reading. And especially in secondary school, you'll start to see some stress and anxiety, a lot of frustration, struggles with organization, and the volume of the reading and writing starts to become an issue. Now let's talk about identification. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is a law that was first developed in 1974 and has continued to grow into the main law today for special education. It is a comprehensive law that guides public and charter schools in identification, education, and transition for students with disabilities. The child find component of the law states that schools must identify, locate, and evaluate all children with disabilities who need special education and related services. It's important to note that every child from birth to age 21 is covered under Child Find, including students who are enrolled in child care centers and private schools. It's our obligation to identify, locate, and evaluate all children with disabilities. If you work in a child care center or a private school, you can go to the nearest public school to help identify learning disabilities in your students. Now, there are many people that can also refer a child for an evaluation: a parent or legal guardian, a school personnel, or any person involved in the care or education of the child. Now we're going to watch a short video from Harvard Medical School about reading and the brain, and pay close attention to the circuits that we use for reading.
In the span of human history, written language is a relatively recent innovation. Unlike spoken language, reading isn't something we've evolved a natural capacity for. Instead, when we learn to read, we have to intentionally retrain different parts of the brain that evolved for other purposes to work together. For example, visual areas that evolved to recognize faces learn to recognize letters. And we tap into our language processing areas, ones that evolved to help us manipulate the sounds within words and to process auditory information, as well as areas we use to understand meaning. These brain regions communicate through white matter pathways that form and strengthen as we learn to read. This is a long process that begins as soon as a child starts learning language. After mastering language, we need to learn phonics, to map the sounds of language onto groups of letters. With practice, those growing neural pathways help us to more automatically connect letters with sounds, words, and meaning until reading feels almost natural. Researchers are exploring how differences in these pathways and the brain areas that they connect might relate to learning disabilities like dyslexia. Their insights are paving the way for earlier and more effective interventions to ensure that all kids have a chance to learn how to read.
The International Dyslexia Association describes dyslexia as a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. What that means is that the researchers have started to notice the difference in the structure of a brain with dyslexia and the impact of interventions. In the video, we saw that there are several areas of the brain that typically light up to create a circuit while reading. Researchers have used fMRI studies to compare the brains of fluent readers to people with dyslexia before and after interventions when completing a reading task. You can see that the image on the screen of a brain with dyslexia before evidence-based interventions does not light up in the same circuit that we saw on the video. But there is hope because these studies show that specific types of interventions report changes that literally change the brain to be more like that of the fluent reader in the video. The intervention that has been identified as most effective for students with dyslexia is called structured literacy, sometimes referred to multisensory structured language in some Montessori and dyslexia trainings. It is an effective intervention for students with dyslexia, and every state has laws built around this type of instruction for students with dyslexia. There are two main elements of this type of instruction: the components, which is in the inner purple circle on your screen, and the delivery. That's the circle with the blue outer edge. The components of structured literacy include things like phonemic awareness, phonics, orthography, morphology, syntax, and semantics. These components are delivered explicitly in a systematic way that is cumulative. The delivery of instruction is also very interactive between teacher and student. Immediate feedback on errors and diagnostic instruction is central to the delivery of this type of instruction. It is important to note that there are structured literacy or multisensory methods that are designed for the general education or tier 1 instruction, like some maybe you have been trained in when you learned about the Montessori method. But there are many differences when structured literacy is designed specifically for students with dyslexia. And one thing that you can do for your school or organization is ensure that teachers are trained in recognizing and implementing strategies for students with disabilities in a Montessori school, and that there are specialists who are trained to provide structured literacy for students with dyslexia. As you can see from a study about the resources that are most helpful in supporting students with disabilities in Montessori schools in 2022, showed that professional development is the most desired resource. In another study about attitudes towards inclusion in 2015, there were many similarities and differences between Montessorians and traditional teachers. In this slide, you can see that there are many similar positive attitudes about serving students with disabilities, like positive feelings about inclusion, access to supports from specialists, and experience with students with disabilities. Now, some of the differences were the knowledge about inclusion. So part of a traditional teacher preparation program includes courses about students with disabilities and strategies for special education. And many times in the Montessori method, it can be an add-on certification after the basic level. Another difference was the range of disabilities. In this study, the Montessori schools that reported to the survey were mostly from private schools. And due to the laws like IDEA, there are legal mandates that require a fuller range of disabilities in the public school setting. One thing to note is both the private school and public school setting in this study had access to students with learning disabilities like dyslexia. Now, where to find training for all teachers and for dyslexia specialists. All teachers need professional development related to students with disabilities, like the ones that are offered through Sarasota University, Montessori training centers, or you could start a book club about overcoming dyslexia or the Makar model for Montessori instruction. Students with dyslexia also need access to specialists who have advanced certifications in academic language therapy, like through ALTA or IDA. Now, if you go to one of the websites for ALTA or IDA, you'll find some local training centers in your state. Now let's talk a little bit about Montessori supports. You can scan the QR code to find Montessori supports for all elements of the Montessori method. One of the tools that I think is very important is using observation as a tool for understanding student needs. Remember, special education is collaboration, so observing with someone that is knowledgeable about the disability will help you to understand the student needs. Another one is to use adaptations as a tool for internalizing concepts. The QR code has a list of many different adaptations for all of the different elements of the Montessori method. But here's 3 that are really important. First, focus on the development of oral language, especially for students with dyslexia. Increase the structure. Use things like control charts, visual schedules, and teaching students how to make work choices. And last but not least, combine structured literacy with Montessori language presentations. Now I'm going to end this slideshow so that I can see you as you share how you collaborate with special education teachers or specialists at your school. Please raise your hand in Zoom to answer this question. How do you collaborate with specialists or special education teachers at your school? Okay, who's going to be brave and share?
This is such an important component, the collaboration between special ed and the traditional or classroom teacher. In my experience, that is the the special sauce that makes it all work. And there are so many different configurations, having been a special education teacher myself. You know, you have to find what works for that classroom. Sometimes it's the subject area, and sometimes it's the individual that you're working with as well. But there are a lot of different configurations that can work when it comes to that collaboration, from push in to pull out to co-teaching. You know, finding that right fit for the child and for the teacher in the classroom. It's really important. I'm interested to hear if anyone has had a tip or technique that you've used that works especially well. Or a
Hi.
question. Maybe you have a dilemma. Yes.
Hi, this is
Hi, Rhonda.
Rana. Mhm.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you all. Holly, this is such a great topic, and I think it's really important for us teachers who are not experts in special education to just kind of understand, I think, the very basic red flags or markers or, you know, a developmental milestone to look for. Especially I'm thinking between 0 to 6, that age group, that some of the things that are just, you might think that, oh, they're going to outgrow this, or it's just a phase. And some of the things are really red flags that they would benefit if they are addressed right away.
Absolutely.
So I think some kind of professional development or training, especially for new teachers, you know, just to kind of what to look for. I had a personal experience with my son years ago. Now he's a junior in a college right now. This was many years ago. He transitioned from the primary classroom to the lower elementary classroom, and he was the youngest in the group. That classroom had kids from 6 to 9, so he was a young 6-year-old at that time. And pretty much one whole semester, he did not do anything. He would just sit, observe. And he'd been a really bright student until then. So it was a surprise. I was a brand new Montessori assistant at that time. I did not know what to do. So I would ask him every day, like, okay, what did you do? What work? Did you finish your work? Or what were you working on? And I would pretty much get the same answer, that I was watching. And that that went on for quite a long time. And I did get a, you know, from his teacher, that he was concerned and we should get him tested. I was not ready to take that path yet, because I had seen him in the primary environment and he was a different child. So it took me a while to make that decision. But meanwhile, something happened. It was just like one day he did not do not anything. The other day he was doing everything. And he, until then, he kept telling us that I was watching, and he was literally watching.
Wow.
It took us a while to understand that he just needed that whole semester to watch.
Interesting.
And yeah, so that is something that I really want, especially new teachers, to understand, that sometimes it's just they need the time to get comfortable, you know, and they're just watching.
Wow, what a powerful story, and a great example of following the child, right, Rana?
Yes.
Yeah, and Norman, Dr. Norman, you have your hand up, and I read in the chat your comment as well. Maybe you'd like to share that with our group.
Yes, thank you. First, Holly, thank you so much. It's such an important value to bring forward, because when you think about the fact that as you spoke about neurodiversity, we also have to remember the biodiversity of our human growth and development. And when we think back to the core tenets of Montessori philosophy, it is about observation. That's key. The value of observation assists us in individualizing the child's experience, well, the child's curiosity with what they can experience in the classroom. And as you talked about the components of building language for using the tool of reading for learning, I always said in my early career, it's, when a parent like Rana, for instance, says, well, I just need to step back and observe, and yet we have the conversation. It's better to go down that path, and maybe we'll find a dead end, but at least we've investigated the components along the way. Because if we had never gone down that path, we may ultimately find, as she found, an answer that it's not a thoroughfare, but maybe it's a walking path, right? Meaning that there's a differentiation in the learning, which every Montessori piece of material offers to us, right? The value of kinesthetic, sensory-based learning is premier. On one hand, I say that from the standpoint of the empirical Montessori education and philosophy and principles. Then you talk about the indifferences that occur in private sector where there's resource scarcity oftentimes, and then the legal requirements that are the umbrella over both public and private sector. And so in public sector, then we have special education as a value. And my example is just one of many, but the fact that it was important for me as someone who wrote a charter, knowing that I was going to be in the public sector, to spearhead looking for someone with special ed expertise, someone that knows the IDEA back and forth, the ADA, and any accommodations that manifest under a IEP or IFSP, which is the 0 to 3 component, the IEP through 18, the adult manifestations of special education, as well as the 504 qualifications. And really what you're bringing forward to us is just the recognition that Montessori's skill of observation is so important in communicating transparency and ultimate care for every child's educational experience. So thank you.
So well
You're
said.
welcome.
So well said, Dr. Norman. And I would point out, whether you're in a public school setting or a private school setting, it's imperative to understand and to know the legal requirements to serve children with learning differences. The area of special education is the most litigated area of education when it comes to working with students. So it would be in your best interest to take the time to attend seminars like this, as you're doing today. So I applaud you for being here, but also to expand your knowledge or expand the knowledge of resources that may be available to you to make sure that you are meeting the legal requirements when working with your students.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on know all the resources that are out there for your private school. Like you have resources for evaluation that are no cost to the family, that are probably just right down the street at the nearest public school for you. And there are even some services that are available, like it's common for speech therapy to be provided to private schools after students evaluated for a speech difficulty. So,
do we have any questions from the audience for Dr. Forrest this evening? She has a wealth of knowledge. This is your chance. Lydia, yes.
Okay, hello everyone. This is Lydia Zarafek from Houston. So I have a question for Holly, and maybe it's a little bit off topic because we're discussing, you know, children within Montessori's topic, but I wanted to ask you, Holly, a little bit maybe about how does dyslexia manifest itself in adults? Because we do see it. And sometimes those individuals have never been identified as having dyslexia, but nevertheless, they may have certain characteristics that, you know, could be detected. So what does research say or about adult dyslexia? Anything you can share?
Okay. Well, I am not sure on all of the research on adult dyslexia, but I can tell you from a personal perspective, I have 2 kids with dyslexia, and my husband is an engineer and he has a complete math mind, and his reading fluency is a little bit lower than you would expect in an adult. And some of the things that he's told me is when he was in college, he would go to every class and he would listen and soak up, and the professor usually tells you everything you need to know in class. So as long as he didn't miss a class or didn't try and take notes or open a book to read, he did really well in college. And things like how his coworkers would say things to me like, he'll read the emails, and I knew from knowing him that it would take him a while to get through his emails, but they would say he would never miss a detail because he's reading word for word. He's not scanning the email like most of us are doing, right? There's, also there's a lot of struggles with adults with dyslexia who were never identified. There's a large amount of the prison population that is functionally illiterate, and of the population that's functionally illiterate, about half have dyslexia. So we know that it can have some extreme outcomes. I mean, there are about half of the Forbes list of the most successful entrepreneurs, also have dyslexia. So there's a lot of success stories as well. But if we can get intervention to students while they're in school, we can, eliminate those difficulties for the future.
I'll get to you, Carol, and then Dr. Norman. There's a question in the chat regarding thoughts about asking about thoughts for working with a child with a speech disorder, and I have dropped in a resource in the chat. It's really important to, the power of observation that we know is key to Montessori, and working to try different things. And remembering that interventions for children with children with who are neurodiverse, it's a journey, right? So you try different things and see if they work. And with speech disorders, there's so many. You may have a child who has articulation differences or expressive or receptive language delays. So it's really important to work with a speech and language pathologist as you develop that plan. Thank you, Carol, for waiting. And then we have Dr. Norman.
Holly, I just wanted to comment on what you just said earlier. I had what I thought was a fearful opportunity, but what it turned out to be was a very amazing opportunity to be on an accreditation commission once upon a time with San Quentin Prison in the San Francisco Bay Area, the most high-risk prison in the state of California. Also having more than 70 rehabilitative programs And by far, what you just said is so true, is that most of those incarcerated people, despite the convictions of their wrongs, learned early failure in school, lacking intervention. And when we think about ourselves as Montessorians, as peace educators, the best, most important intervention is early intervention. And how else do we obtain that information other than we observe? And what I found in the conversations with those individuals at that time, we were accrediting a general studies associate degree for both people that were lifers as well as those who looked forward to potential parole someday. That degree addressed the recidivism of helping them to find care in their environment. And you and I all know, as Montessorians, the core value of what could be never having to intervene is building upon the core of practical life skills, right? Care of self, care of one another, care of the environment, care of their social capacity, and control of movement. And if those things that we emphasize can make a mark on the world, we would be a different population.
For sure.
So thank you, Holly, for sharing that.
There's a book called Undiagnosed Dyslexia, and the author of it found out that he has dyslexia after his second visit to prison. And after he got out the second time, he was able to get some help with a dyslexia intervention. And he eventually became a Emmy-nominated actor. And if you think about an actor, they have to read a lot of scripts, memorize a lot of lines. And so he could have never done that without intervention.
Holly, what was the name of that book?
It's called Undiagnosed Dyslexia.
Thank you. And Carol,
Sure. I was a little slow getting on because I couldn't get to the unmute button very quickly. But I was just going to remark to Lydia, my son and daughter-in-law both are adults with dyslexia. And they both have a master's degree. And one thing that is key in their success is that they had intervention. And my son did not get intervention through school, but he did through me. And they both became very, they're both above average IQ, and they have done very well. Their interventions can follow all the way through adulthood. There are even, if you have to take a test or something like that in your job, if you have been diagnosed with a learning disability, that you get the same accommodations, or you get accommodations for that as well, even as an adult. And I think that's very important for us to remember, and for us to make sure that our students know this, so that they can, as they become adults, that they can advocate for themselves, that they know how to do that.
absolutely.
Thank you for sharing this, Carol. Really appreciate it.
Holly, we also had a question in the chat asking if you have a recommended checklist or a resource to help teachers identify characteristics of dyslexia. Something that teachers could use.
On the International Dyslexia Association's website, there are a lot of fact sheets about dyslexia, and also kind of everything you can imagine. There's a long list of fact sheets, but if you just look at the one that focuses on the characteristics, that would be a quick fact sheet where you could look at. The Texas Education Agency also has some nice fact sheets about dyslexia as well.
I just dropped
And
the website in the chat for the International Dyslexia Association.
And every state has something called like a dyslexia handbook or a dyslexia guidebook that usually has the characteristics of dyslexia. It'll usually start with that.
Holly, thank you so much. This has been a great overview of dyslexia, and I so appreciate your time and the gift of your knowledge sharing with us this evening as we've learned about demystifying dyslexia.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you everyone for being here. I do want to just remind everyone that our next Sarasota University session begins October 22nd. So if you or someone you know is interested in enrolling at Sarasota, we do offer the Bachelor's of Science in Montessori Education and then the Master's of Arts in Montessori Education and Montessori Leadership. And next summer, we'll be launching the doctoral program in Montessori education. And Dr. Norman is going to be instrumental in helping me get that off the ground. So we hope to see you at Sarasota. I do want to remind everyone that the International Montessori Council is holding their conference in Atlanta this year. And that's in October. So please go to the IMC website and take advantage of registration. And we will have a table at that conference. So we hope to see you in Atlanta and connect in person. Our next Sarasota Colloquium, our colloquia are on the third Tuesday of every month. And our next guest speaker, some of you may know, on October 15th is Sheila Linville, and she will be presenting on the blessing of boys and how we can best serve the boys in our classrooms. So hope to see you all back again next month on October 15th. And if not there, perhaps in person in Atlanta. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. And again, thank you, Dr. Forrest, for your gift of time and all of the great knowledge that you've shared with us this evening. Thank you, everybody. And if you're Sarasota faculty, I'll see you at 7:30 Central Time in our meeting room. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Forrest.
Thank you.